The place that I'd like to start from is to make the point that every food carries some degree of risk, and sprouts is no exception. A number of years ago, FDA went to the National Advisory Committee for Microbiological Criteria for Foods and asked that they do a white paper on produce safety. They did that white paper, and one of their conclusions in that white paper was that sprouts are also subject to most of the hazards for fresh produce, but have a number of hazards on top of that that are unique to sprouts, largely because of the production practices involved. And so they followed the produce white paper with the sprout white paper, going through the hazards and making some recommendations for controls. In 1998, FDA released Good Agricultural Practices guidance for fresh produce. And when we were doing that, we envisioned that that broad scope guidance would not be adequate to cover all situations. So in 1999, we released our first commodity-specific guidance. This guidance is directed towards sprout production. It's based largely on the recommendations that NACMF made. One thing to point out is that this is a multi-hurdle approach. The 5 basic recommendations taken together, we believed would go some distance to minimize the hazards associated with sprout production. The recommendations are shown here. We also had a companion guidance to describe in more detail one of these recommendations, microbial testing, which is fairly complex and needed additional instruction to help people get it right. 2 of these I would like to focus on in particular. One of the recommendations was to apply 1 or more approved seed treatment shown to reduce pathogens to the seeds prior to sprouting. Now, in many sprout outbreaks, we believe that seed were the source of contamination for the finished product. During sprout production, you have warm, moist conditions that encourage the sprouts or the seeds to sprout. They also encourage the growth of pathogens if they're present. And so the seed treatment, while it may not be 100% effective, if there are any survivors, they can recover and grow during the sprouting process. But we do believe that the seed treatment, if done appropriately, can reduce the number of lots that are contaminated and therefore the number of illnesses. Now, the other recommendation that's really significant is for testing spent irrigation water. That's the water that flows between all the sprouts during the sprouting process. It is a good representation of pathogen levels in the sprouts if pathogens are present. It is relatively homogeneous, so there's a higher, it's easier and more reliable than testing sprouts themselves. Now, FDA's position generally is that you cannot test your way to safety. Sprouts are a unique situation where we believe that testing every production lot, because you can have spot contamination in one lot but not the next, gives you one more chance to catch contaminated product before it goes to market. Now, I expect Rob Tauxe will present some of the CDC information on outbreaks and illnesses associated with sprouts, and CDC is the official keeper of the data. FDA has our own internal data set that we look at to help us keep track of things on a more immediate timeline. And I'd like to use this kind of as a backdrop to point out a number of events. In 1999, between 96 and 99, we had 13 sprout outbreaks. That's pretty significant. We released the sprout guidance in 99. We took an unusual step and went direct to final guidance as opposed to our normal notice and comment rulemaking procedure. And in fact, after release of the sprout guidance, it appeared that the number of outbreaks declined for a while. And with a few exceptions, the number of illnesses per outbreak also declined. In fact, in 2000, we only had one sprout outbreak. In 2005, 6, and 7, we had no reported sprout outbreaks. However, outbreaks began to recur in 2008. In 2009, FDA and CDC had a call with industry to make them aware that the sprout outbreaks were beginning to recur again, and to share with them information that we had gathered in investigations and assignments showing some of the things that we had observed that people either were not implementing or were implementing incorrectly. Also in 2009, there was an International Sprout Growers Association meeting that added a special technical day devoted to sprout safety. At the end of that day, a group of people at those meetings formed the Sprout Task Force. They made a commitment to tackling several of the key issues that they believe had kind of been lacking in implementation of sprout guidance and best practices in the industry. One very important thing, many of the industry members, even those getting third-party audits, were being subjected to GMP audits that did not contain sprout-specific considerations. So they began work on a meaningful sprout-specific audit that's available on the ITT IFISH website and also on the Sprout Safety Alliance website that I'll get to in a minute. Recently, USDA AMS has pilot tested the IFISH Sprout Task Force audit, and they have recommended that this audit be converted to the harmonized GAPS standards format. Work is going on there now. They also established an expert panel to review seed treatments. There are a number of issues with the 20,000 parts per million calcium hypochlorite that we cited in our guidance, and they're also evaluating alternative tests for spent irrigation water. All of this to contribute to better implementation of recommendations. We are also currently working on a produce safety rule. Within that produce safety rule, and sprouts are produce, so the produce rule would apply, there's a special subpart directed to sprout production that addresses many of the issues that are sprout specific. I mentioned the Sprout Safety Alliance. If you go to their website, you can see a number of their accomplishments. As chapters are developed in this standardized curriculum, we're going out and pilot testing them and getting feedback on these chapters. This is a table of contents for the chapters, focusing not only on sanitary practices within the operation, but the sprout-specific recommendations. Now, I am arguing that sprouts can be made safe, and there are a number of reasons for this. We have gotten a lot of experience and lessons learned from investigations and assignments. There is now a dedicated staff within the Office of Food Safety devoted to produce safety issues, a number of people working on sprout issues in particular. In part, this was Bob Buchanan's suggestion before he left CFSAN. There are many issues FDA deals with, and when something else becomes more critical, People were getting pulled off of produce issues. We have stakeholder engagement. We have the proposed produce rule, the Sprout Safety Alliance, the Sprout Task Force, and Audit, and most of all, we have momentum. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to my colleague, Michelle Smith, for an excellent overview of this troubling issue. The problem was first recognized in an international outbreak of salmonellosis in 1995 that was traced to alfalfa sprouts made from seeds that had been collected from 3 different continents, some of them stored up to 10 years. The following year, a catastrophic outbreak of E. coli 0157H7 infections occurred in Japan that was traced to radish sprouts. The sprouts were used in a school lunch program, made 12,000 children ill, 121 cases of hemolytic uremic syndrome, and 3 deaths. That was a problem to the school system. After more outbreaks, the FDA issued the guidelines we just heard about in 1999. Key bits being to soak the seeds in dilute chlorine bleach and test the sprout irrigation water for salmonella and for E. coli 0157. So how's that working? Well, I happen to have a summary here of the outbreaks that have been reported to CDC, investigated by local and state health departments since 1998 through 2010. And what we've got is another 33 outbreaks. That's an average of 3 per year. And actually, the 2 most recent years, 2009, 2010, that are included in this, had 4 outbreaks each. The problem is not going away, it's intensifying. 28 of the outbreaks have been caused by salmonella, 4 by Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, and 1 by Listeria. The diversity is remarkable. 15 serotypes of salmonella have been involved, and both 0157 and non-modal 0157. In this series, we've had other STECs since. The implicated sprouts for 20 outbreaks were alfalfa, bean sprouts for 8 outbreaks, and for 4, there were clover. And I should note that all the sprouts were eaten raw. We're not talking about cooked sprouts. If you cook them, there doesn't appear to be much hazard. When the source of the seed was known, 65% were imported. And there was information on seed treatment available for 18 outbreaks. 15 did not follow FDA guidelines. Worrisomely, 3 reported that they did. Let's see. How do I advance? Is that there? Now, worst of all, in the next year after this series, in 2011, an outbreak caused by an unusual Shiga toxin-producing E. coli 0104 occurred in northern Germany with an echo outbreak in France. There were a total of 3,149 cases, 769 of which developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, filling every dialysis bed in Germany, basically, and 42 people died, including 1 in this country. The outbreak was traced to fenugreek sprouts made from seeds that were imported from Egypt and sprouted in Germany and in France after receiving no treatment at all. Most were sprouted commercially. A few were sprouted at home. Now, what makes sprouts so hazardous? The basic problem is the sprouting, of course. The same moist, warm conditions needed for the sprout to grow are the ideal growth medium for many bacteria, as this in vivo test shows from some studies done early on at the University of Georgia by a group replicating the sprouting process. They started with Salmonella stanley at 10 to the 3rd and showed that it rapidly grew and during sprouting to reach 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 7th, and then stayed there really throughout the period of storage. Worse, the bacteria also internalize, entering inside the sprout through the root hairs into the internal tissues of the growing plant, where you just are never going to be able to wash them off. So bacterial pathogens that are present on the seed pose a risk. And so far, that includes the 15 serotypes of Salmonella, several serotypes of Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, and Listeria, and that list is likely to grow. Now, what this means is that if there is it's not, I don't think of it as actually a multi-hurdle process, because if even one bacteria survives the initial treatment, it has the opportunity to fully recover and to grow to very high counts. So how do the seeds become contaminated? Well, that's actually not difficult to imagine. Seeds are a raw agricultural commodity. Nobody thinks of them as food. They are harvested, they're produced and harvested in order to make more alfalfa. And the question of whether there is a human pathogen or not on them does not arise. It is simply not a question. They are raised in open fields, which may be grazed at the same time or grazed after harvest. And when the seeds are harvested, they're harvested with a machine, a combine, like a lot of other agricultural products, and gathered without any particular concern as to what else the combine has been harvesting or whatever other contaminants or crops might be nearby. Then, to help them sprout, they are typically roughened or scarified so that the outer surface is filled with cracks and pits that provide perfect niches for bacteria to hide from any treatment that might be applied. So I think we should not be surprised that the controls are imperfect. Culturing seeds themselves is very difficult. There is something about a seed that inhibits the growth of whatever is on there, even if it's done intentionally, experimentally. It's hard to recover. You have to sprout them and amplify. Then decontaminating seeds is tricky. It takes high levels of disinfectant, like chlorine, for longer than sprouters like to use or to expose their workers to, and it's not always effective. And if even one cell makes it through, it can easily be amplified. Culturing the end product is the last step, the last hurdle to catch it, and the requirements are to culture for Salmonella and for E. coli 157. Well, that misses all the non-157S tech, and it misses Listeria. The bottom line for us in public health is we're still seeing outbreaks. Already this year, there have been 2 outbreaks, an E. coli 0121 outbreak from clover sprouts that rather mysteriously were used in sandwiches at Jimmy John's restaurants, who had an outbreak several years ago, decided not to use sprouts, and for some reason brought sprouts back on the menu again and hosted another outbreak. Salmonella Newport from a new product on the horizon. Here's one I had never heard of before. Take chia seeds. Chia is Salvia hispanica. It's a typical crop used since the time of pre-Columbian Indians in Central America. Take those seeds, sprout them. Now dry the sprouts and grind them up into a flour. And take that and put it in a bag and sell it for $20 for a small bag as chia sprout powder. We've just had an outbreak of Salmonella Newport and a couple of other serotypes from that product. So I looked for an image of what is a consumer product that really could not be made safe. I thought, well, this is Indianapolis, so maybe there's a car. And I thought, for people of a certain age, especially guys of a certain age, the early 60s, the Corvair was a beautiful car that Ralph Nader called unsafe at any speed. Now, I recognize that's ancient history now. That's not going to be probably the best metaphor. That's faded. But this summer in Atlanta, when I went looking, I found another consumer product that I think is unsafe at any speed. I found it for sale in the local seed store, our garden shop, where you can buy fenugreek seeds in order to sprout them in your own home. It's nice, it's USDA organic. And then at Whole Foods, there was there's a large display. Well, I'm not going to be able to show you what it is, but I happen to have, they also, can I go back to, maybe my animation is shot. Whole Foods is also selling seeds for sprouting, and a whole kit, the cup, the water, the instructions, dozens of different types of seeds, including fenugreek. So if you missed out in 2011, you can try fenugreek at home. And That's why I think sprouts are unsafe at any speed.
Rob Tauxe asked, how's the guidance going? And after we released the sprout guidance, and it was being implemented for a while, and then we had our first outbreak where it appeared that the firm was following FDA sprout guidance because they were doing 5 things, one thing in each of those categories. In one instance, a firm that claimed they were doing seed treatments later retracted that statement and sent us a notarized fax that said, well, we really weren't doing it consistently. In a number of other situations where the investigators came back saying that the firm was following the guidance, we started to develop lists of questions that would drill down to see if the firm really was following the guidance, and in a number of situations found out they were not following it in a way that would be effective. And so in response to that, we wrote a guidance to the field, laying out specifically what kinds of steps we would expect the firm to be doing and how, in particular, the investigators could verify that or not. We also conducted training for sprout inspections specifically, and I imagine there will be additional training when the regulation is final. Testing for Salmonella and E. coli 0157 in spent irrigation water. Those are the 2 pathogens that have been involved in the majority of the sprout outbreaks. Rob mentioned that there are emerging pathogens. We asked questions about this in our proposed produce rule, how to deal with it. 30 years ago, 0157 was an emerging pathogen, and testing methodologies, et cetera, have been developed to deal with that. And I imagine at some point in the future, we will have similar technologies to deal with some of the emerging pathogens that we're starting to see with sprouts. We're not there yet. Seed itself is a particular challenge. It's been estimated that when we are able to find pathogens in seed, which is very rarely, that the numbers present may be as low as 3 to 5 colony-forming units per kilogram of seed. And on top of this, the additional challenge is that the contamination is very sporadic. It may be hot spots in different bags of the same seed lot. So it's very difficult to find there, but as Rob mentioned, it grows during sprouting, and that's why we focus on testing spent irrigation water. If it's there, you can find it. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob will give you your chance to rebut.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Michelle. There's a sociological problem here as well, and all the education in the world is up against this problem, and that is that the same person who is ready to spend 20 bucks for a small bag of organic, raw, non-GMO chia sprout powder is not likely to be excited about high-strength chlorine treatment or fumigation or other seed disinfectant processes. And they're not only they're not going to be excited about it, but neither are the people who are producing the product for them. And how to do that piece of marketing is a huge challenge, I think. Another problem that I find really particularly troubling is the international problem. The seed market is global, and the number of countries that produce seed for agricultural purposes, from which it can be tapped and drawn into for sprouting, is probably close to the number of countries in the world. But some of the big grain producers are in some very primitive places. Fenugreek, for example, is the leading producer of fenugreek is India. We know that the seeds can be stored for years and still sprouted. We know that Salmonella and E. coli can survive for years in the sprouts and still grow easily and rapidly when they are sprouted. And so the testing involved and the number and volume involved is to me a bit mind-boggling. I have a small present for you, which is a nice packet from my garden shop of fenugreek seeds made for sprouting. But you'll be glad to know that on the back there actually are instructions. It says, if not properly disinfected, all seeds have the possibility of carrying E. coli bacteria or other foodborne pathogens. Please disinfect the seed prior to sprouting by soaking up to a 2% bleach solution, a teaspoon of bleach to a cup of hot tap water for 15 minutes, and rinse thoroughly. So with that, it should be perfectly safe. I give it to you. Enjoy with, enjoy with confidence.
That's it? Yep, thank you. You can keep that. Normally, we'd have 6 minutes for questions. We're a little bit behind, so we're going to limit it to 3. So if you have a couple burning questions, please approach the microphone, and we'll try to get a couple in.
No, it's a very interesting area. I remember being in Washington, I think in 2005, where we had this meeting of the FDA, and what the idea was to try and find a new seed disinfection method. And in that meeting, 5 effective methods were selected or discussed, but none adopted. And when you see the history of sprout industry, basically the government want the industry to act on their own, but the industry want the government to act. So maybe it's just a change of philosophy. Trying to get these new treatments online is the best way.
Okay, I mentioned that we now have a dedicated produce safety staff, and I mean dedicated in both senses of the word. They are working exclusively on produce safety issues, and that includes sprouts. Now, in 2005, we held a public meeting talking about the safety of sprouts, what needed to be done. We cover a lot of topics in the Office of Food Safety. In 2006, we had the spinach outbreak. Sprouts were doing pretty good, had no outbreaks for 3 years, and so our attention was somewhat diverted. What we are doing now and what the Sprout Task Force is doing is actually taking responsibility, setting up an expert review panel to look at those seed treatments and identify ones that can be at least equally effective to calcium hypochlorite, and establish an annex for the sprout audit, make that information available to everyone. We can cite it. And there are folks within the produce safety staff who are dealing directly with EPA to answer some of the questions about labeling and the process for anything that appears efficacious. What do we still need to do to make it available for sprouters? So we're on it.
I'd just comment that I think the challenge, as I said, is going to be multinational, and this makes it extra difficult. In this chia flower, the chia sprout flower outbreak, the seeds came from one country. They were sprouted and ground in another country to the north of us. And the seeds came from a country to the south of us. They were sprouted and ground in a country to the north of us, and they were marketed across the North American continent. And I'm not sure who's in charge of what in that process. It is a challenge. And I would point out that in that packet of seeds that I gave you, there's no indication of where the seeds came from. So it's any of perhaps 40 countries.